Do we have one more?
I think I'm next, maybe.
Yes, sir, you are. You had your hand up for a while.
My question, first of all, thanks for presenting so well with such good humor. I didn't know we could cover subjects like this with so much good humor. But I also, and maybe we've begun to zero in on what's still in my mind, and that is there are some substantial issues in our world today that really do threaten the species, as I think you both said. You started us out with the 4 Ds on Thursday. You've talked about the paradigm shifts today. I'm thinking I'd like to hear from you on how to operationalize the life of a Christian today, or a citizen today, or a parent, or a grandparent. How do we take that, what you've given us, productively to deal with climate change, to deal with immigration, to deal with the rollback of SALT treaties on missiles? What are the practical, how do we operationalize this, I guess? Is that a reasonable way to ask a question? How do we operationalize it?
Yeah, so we're dealing, with big issues, as you indicate. These are structural issues. And I think, the thing is, while we do have structural systems, those systems are still comprised of, individuals who are acting on behalf of that system. So a system doesn't exist as an objective something out there apart from us. I think one of the things is, and I think sometimes there's several levels here. One is, I think, these are so complex now, these problems, that we can feel helpless. I think Matt named this in some ways. We feel helpless in the face of the enormity of these problems. But there are things, and here's what we're saying, is that there's no large problem that we're not part of in some way. And I think the first thing is to have a realization that we are part of something that's more than ourselves, that we don't act as simple, isolated, existent individuals. Our actions make a difference. The way we say hello to one another makes a difference. And it seems inconsequential in the face of the enormity of these problems. Does it really matter how I say hello to someone? Yes, it does, because it's the small, it's the particular of our actions that eventually, you might say, build up into the larger, more universal type of actions, right? And so I think the first thing we're talking about here is to have an awareness of ourselves as an operative awareness of our daily lives, which is why meditation is so fundamental here, which is why the inner work of the self is so fundamental here. This is not something like, oh, what a lovely idea, I think I'll just think about myself for a while. It is rather, we're talking about a significant paradigm shift, first of the human person. The person is, in a sense, that which is the shaper of the whole that is emerging, right? We do create these problems. And so therefore, what we're saying is these problems, first of all, are not that they're unsolvable. They're not fixed problems. They are part and parcel, and they're flowing out of a whole complexity of human behavior and human actions. And so we do need a transformation of personhood. And I think we have to get hold of the fact that what are we as human persons and what are we becoming? We do not have any real sense of this. Maybe something personally, collectively, no. We cannot even define ourselves collectively as a human person community. So I do think in terms of Christian life or a type of religious life, we just have to keep asking ourselves, what are the values that shape our lives? What do we really believe in? What can we let go of? What are we being called into? Who are we in dialogue with? If we think we can face these problems as single persons, I'm going to handle this myself, that's a Newtonian kind of mindset. It's a collective that we're part of. So who are our dialogue partners? Who do we share our concerns with? Who do we share our hopes with? How do we build with one another in forming new relationships within our local communities, within our own households, for example? Do we even change the patterns of our lives within our own households? So the type of transformation that can lead to resolving some of these big issues that we find ourselves in must begin local, I think, and must begin within the particular household of our lives, and including the inner self of our lives. Otherwise, we will not get to where we want to go, and that is a new type of world where we can have a transformed type of personhood, a transformed community of justice and peace. Right now, those are big ideals that are held out to us. They keep pulling us forward, but we have a lot of work to do on the ground in just turning our minds around. I find sometimes we're attracted to these ideas, but to actually allow them to shift our whole way of thinking. When, there's a saying, when the level of our awareness changes, we start attracting a new reality. And the thing is, are we aware of the level of our own shifts in consciousness? And how are our own levels of action shifting? I think we have to begin there, rather than trying to solve these big issues. And that's the problem, by the way, why they keep getting worse and not better. Because we are trying to solve them out of a framework that is not including, you might say, a transformed consciousness. We're trying to solve them with old principles and old paradigms. It doesn't work, and it's not going to work. It's only going to get worse, actually, before it can get better.
Well, I like what Naomi Klein says, that we need a full-throated debate about values in this country. And I do think that the recent political election, for example, certainly brought forth some full-throated debate. It brought forth a lot of new faces, a lot more women, for example. I think the whole idea of bringing women's experience into decision-making is a big leap forward and needs to continue. I think, of course, bringing people of color, people of different cultural backgrounds, of different communities, the whole issue of diversity, vive la différence, that we can welcome diversity in terms of the experiences, the deep experiences of all these different communities. There is a lot of wisdom in the human species, and a lot of it has been discovered at a very heavy cost. It's because of the suffering of many communities that ways of survival have come forward. For example, the role of music, or the role of ritual, which is both of which are so endemic to the black experience, but also to the Jewish experience, for example. I do think ritual is the shortcut to wake people up. This cosmic story that we heard this morning, it's one thing to present it in a lecture and presentation. It's another thing to present it in a ritual context. And I think the young have to be inspired that way to learn this marvelous story of how they got here and where here is and what it is. So I think we need a huge effort in terms of ritual, because ritual is what creates community, and as Malidoma says, there is no community without ritual. So if the community is going to solve the problems, then the community has to come together to celebrate, to praise, to bring the joy forward, but also to grieve together. Grieving is one of the most important things we have to do today as a species, because there are only two kinds of people on the planet today, I believe. Those who are grieving and know it, and those who are grieving and don't know it. What we need is deep grieving, because that is a shortcut. We're all in grief because everyone knows that we're undergoing tremendous loss. The churches and the synagogue and the rest are utterly failing us in terms of grief practices, because I'm convinced that it's only when we do our grief that this boulder in our heart melts. And therefore, the via creativa can come next. Creativity is being held back because of grief. And, creativity is the one thing our species has going for us. I'll tell you a story. When I did that week-long event with 150 scientists on that island 2 summers ago, and the theme was global change, and there was all this despair up front. But at the end of the week, 2 young scientists stood up, and one of them said, he said, with what we know now, we could build islands off of the Pacific coast 1,000 miles out there, so it's not in anyone's backyard. And through wind energy way out there, we could provide all the electrical needs of North America. We wouldn't need any more coal, any more gas, or any more oil. And another young scientist stood up and he said, if we could quadruple the storage capacity of batteries, and we've already doubled it, so we only have to double it one more time, the entire southern continents, the poorest 3 continents on the earth, in terms of human wealth, could leap over the Industrial Revolution entirely and survive entirely as a solar-generated and wind-generated civilization, because we'd have the storage capacity to make that really happen. So what this reminded me of is this amazing gift of our most recent brain, our intellects and our creativity. If we can put them to smart use and make very rapid movement in terms of community possibilities. So I say that combination, rituals that both tell the new creation story from science and also that lead us into grief work and into joy work. We have to learn to be joyful again. That's what ritual ought to be doing for us. For most people, it's kind of dreary. That on the one hand, and then the unleashing of our creativity and the intellects on the other. Do not count us out. Do not count us out. Our previous ancestors who had to meet the ice age head on, not knowing a damn thing about ice, they survived. So don't count our species out yet. But it is cynicism. It is despair. It is greed. It is the sins of the spirit. It is acedia. It is gluttony. Consumerism has put a whole new meaning onto gluttony. The word gluttony comes from gluteus, throat. And I think the whole consumer capitalist system is about stuffing us, whereas the throat is meant to be a birth canal for our wisdom and our joy and our love and our powers of community building and our praise. So we have to back off that world of advertising that is gagging us and will kill us, because sins of the spirit kill you. Thomas Aquinas said, sins of the flesh lead you toward God. Sins of the spirit lead you away from God. So I think those are some of the debates and some of the practices that we should be involved in. I've been involved in a lot of grief practices for 20 years. Like I did one practice for 800 people at a Sounds True conference in the mountains of Colorado a few summers ago. People from all traditions, and I get people down on all sixes and all this, and we do this work. It's in the third chakra where we carry our grief. Now, if you're afraid of your lower chakras, which of course all of education and all of religion has taught white people to be, then you won't. You've got to go out of your way to do this stuff. But you got to get that third chakra, get what's in there out, which includes your anger. That's the first level of grief, and your sorrow, which is the second level of grief. We have to do this together in contexts, in communities. And powerful breakthroughs happen for people. So this one thing happened after this thing I did for the HNB. One guy comes up to me and he says, I've had a psychiatrist for 21 years. I'm firing her on Monday. All I needed was this grief thing that we just did. But we're all carrying grief. So these are some of the practices that we need. Here's another practice. This book I put out on the Stations of the Cosmic Christ with Bishop Mark Andrus and 2 artists who created tablets. So we have the Stations of the Cross in the West, which is really quite lugubrious, but it's powerful. But it's only about the last 20 hours of Jesus' life, which is really focusing on the macabre. But the truth is that there are so many other experiences in Jesus' life and his teachings, and they're all set in a cosmic context. For example, the Nativity. And now our left brain theologians want to say, oh, this isn't history, throw it out. No, it's wonderful. It's story. That's what makes it so powerful. So there's stars involved. There's magi involved. There's sheep involved and shepherds and angels and cows and oxen and mangers. It's a hell of a picture of the cosmos that's happening here. And this is true of all the events in Jesus' life. His baptism, when the sky opened up, that's kind of cosmic. The transfiguration, when he went to the mountaintop and he started beaming, his light came out, like Thomas Merton saw, is in all of us, not just Jesus. And you go to the whole thing, the crucifixion, the resurrection, the ascension, Pentecost, they're all set in a cosmic context. And we've screwed that up in Christianity. So that's what that book does. It's a practice. We need practices. And we need to start practicing the cosmic Christ. I talked about the cosmic Christ. She talked about the cosmic. Teilhard talked about the cosmic Christ. We need practices to get this going in us, to get it in our bones, in our cells, in our molecules. And, yeah. And so that's what I say.